Pretty much every TCG metagame is going to have some kind of aggressive deck that you're either going to need to play or know how to beat. And today we're covering the deck for the Grand Archive Set 2 metagame that we think has a high chance of being just that very deck. And this is Fire Lorraine Allies. Let's take a look at it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck, and like I said, we are back with another Grand Archive deck profile for the Fractured Crown metagame, and this is Fire Aggro Ally Lorraine. This is going to be a deck I think you're going to see all over the place. I think there are going to be a lot of these at Ascent, and really it just represents, I think, one of the most straightforward and potent aggro packages in the game right now. So if you're looking for exactly that, a deck where you can just play guys, bash with them, and make your opponent sad, put the pressure on your opponent, and occasionally kind of spike some big combos on your opponent as well, this is the deck for you. Now, before I jump too far into it, I do want to mention this is a shout out to Dylan B, who was 4th place at the Yeti Tournament of Champions recently. So we really liked some of the ideas Dylan had in their list. So we went ahead and we did a few tweaks to the stuff we were working on to incorporate some of their ideas. And we'll be talking about that a little bit throughout here. So shout out to Dylan for kind of placing well with this really solid list and showing us some of these ideas. And Dylan's list will be down in the description as well. So if you want to go check it out and compare notes, see what we changed and see what Dylan ran, go ahead, by all means, check it out. We did not want to go ahead and pretend that we came up with a few of these very, very cool ideas. So let's jump right into it. I think we can get through this very fast. So we're going to start off with the Spirit of Fire because we're playing Fire and we want to draw 7 cards. We have Lorraine level 1. We have Lorraine level 2 because you got to play Lorraine level 2. Now in this deck, you are going to be able to win games on level 1. You don't necessarily need to go to 2, but 2 is there to draw the cards to get those huge Rending Flames combos or Flame Sweeps for a lot of damage. We're going to talk about Smoke Bombs next because Smoke Bombs is a very unique card. It's a card that's gaining some stock in the current metagame. Number 1, you can use it just to like protect your Arthur or something who's pumping your whole board. But the very cool thing you can do with it is use it to give an opponent's unit stealth if that opponent's unit has intercept. This will be very good for you. A little rules quirk in the game is that a unit with intercept needs to direct an attack to it, but an attack can't be directed to it if it doesn't have true sight if that unit has stealth. So if your opponent gets that Majestic Spirit in play and you need to get around it, you materialize Smoke Bombs, give the Majestic Spirit stealth. Suddenly, it can no longer intercept your attacks if your attacks don't have true sight, which is a very cool and cheeky interaction that you do want to know about going into this metagame. The next thing we're going to talk about is, and this was one of those choices from Dylan's list that we really liked, the choice to run all 3 baubles in the material deck. This is really cool because honestly, this deck wins so many games early enough where you don't need every single slot in the material deck. It has decent matchups against anything that tends to go late because it's able to put enough pressure on. So instead, in the main deck, we run all 3 baubles so that every single game you're going to have at least 2 Grand Crusaders rings, allowing you to keep that card flow going turn after turn, which will help with your sort of aggressive push. And then when it comes to siding them out in game 2, we have a couple of options you can bring in to replace them. Even if you don't replace both of them, though, that's okay. You just don't need all 12 material deck cards in this matchup. And we found that the sideboard had other space that we thought was more useful. But a cool thing you can do for tweaking your own sideboard is to come up with 2 other cards you want to bring in to sort of shore up the matchup and fill out your material deck if you feel like you're going to end up using them. We have Crystal of Empowerment here, which seems like kind of a weird choice, but really this is here to turn on things like our Verican Acolyte and our Strapping Conscript to make sure we can get those level bonuses, even though we're only going to be at level 1 or sometimes level 2. Crystal is there as a free way to do that. Of course, you're on Grand Crusader's Ring to draw cards. You got to have that in this deck because you need to draw cards. Drawn Blade was a choice that we put in here as a way to sort of turn your late game floating memory into draw a card, plus get a little damage out of it, which is fairly nice. And if sometimes when the game goes into that mid game and your opponent's especially playing things like Verican Acolytes, it can be tough to keep a sword on board to get a little bit of like damage threshold on your flame sweeps. So it's there to help with that. Sword of Seeking, True Sight Sword. You know this card already. This is one of the best it's probably the best 0-cost sword. The one that has the most utility and the most ability to get through endgame protection, things like Innervate Agility and Shrouded Mist. So it's there for that. And then Ornamental Greatsword, it does damage and it pumps your allies, and we are going to have allies in play. So let's jump into the main deck now. Arthur at 4 of because we want to pump our board and attack, and he's a great turn 1 play because you can just make him immortal instead of having him sit around doing nothing. We have 3 Clumsy Apprentice. She's good. She gets a card back. She replaces herself, allows you to play multiple allies in the same turn because of that. She does do damage to you, and if the metagame's quite aggressive, that sometimes is not exactly what you want to be doing, but she does her job. She's great, and she's great to Cremation Ritual. Hasty Messenger, one of the best fire element allies in the game, attacks, discards your floating memory cards, draws more cards, or discards your cards that just are being kind of clunky, not useful right now. Things like Creative Shock later in the game. And she attacks, and that's really important. Obviously, we just want to attack with everything if possible. Flame Rune Swordsman, it attacks, and it has floating memory. Pitch it to your things, or attack with it, or Cremation Ritual, whatever you want to do. Cemetery Sentry, we only have this at 3 of because that 4 cost, again, gets a little clunky occasionally. We're really trying to manage our costs to make sure that you can try and string out as much pressure as possible. However, she's quite good in here because, as you can see, every single card is fire element. And so you're always going to be able to pitch the Cemetery Sentry as long as you have that card in hand. But again, we find these clunky hands where you just end up with no cards in hand or something, or nothing else to do. So yeah, it's there 3 of those, so that you do want to see it, but just not like all the time in multiple copies. Verican Acolyte, a card I do want to see a lot of the time in multiple copies because there are so many Regalia with memory cost 0 that you want to destroy, especially Nullifying Lantern against this deck. Having multiple copies of these can hit a Quicksilver Grail and then you can play another to hit the Nullifying Lantern underneath it. Or you can use it to hit your opponent's Ventus, because we're going to start seeing the rise of some Windrai and Wind Merlin decks that are quite potent and scary. Very great card. And then use that Crystal of Empowerment to hit that level 3+ bonus to pump the Acolytes if you need to, if that's how the game is playing out. Strapping Conscript, she does damage. She's got stats. That's what she's there for. Blazing Bowman, it just does damage. It's got stats. That's what it's there for. Rending Flames. Of course, we're playing Rending Flames in this deck, as well as Fiery Momentum. 2 ways to deal tons and tons and tons of damage, as long as you can just get your graveyard filled with fire element cards. So make sure you do that. Try to do that. If your opponent's playing Nullifying Lantern, they will shut this down. That's why we play the Acolytes. And if it shuts down, it's not even that big of a deal in this deck, because you have so many allies you can play and just attack with. But occasionally, you're going to get these spiky games where you're going to be able to, on like turn 2, Hone by Fire your sword, and then Rending Flames your opponent for a ton of damage, like 12 damage, or if you can get it on the turn you level to 2, you're looking at like 16 damage swings. So it's quite possible to spike out these huge damage spikes out of nowhere, and we do have some other tech in the deck, which we'll get to in a second, that kind of helps protect you from some of the like damage prevention that would stop that. But yeah, I mean, the combination of being able to spike these giant attacks then with just straightforward aggro is where all your pressure comes from in this deck. We play 3 copies of Flame Sweep as a way to fight other aggressive decks, especially on the turn you can level to 2 and Flame Sweep and get a lot of cards out of it. That's super valuable. But even if you can't do that, being able to sweep for 2 damage with a sword, 3 damage if with a crystal and a sword or something, is something you can certainly do as well. As always in Grand Archive, make sure you do your math. Figure out which route does the most damage for the most efficient use of your cards. Hone by Fire is in here to do tons of damage with our giant attacks, as well as, I guess you get a durability counter, which is occasionally cool. But really it's there just to pump damage to combo with Rending Flames. If you can end up doing double Hone by Fire and Rending Flames sometime, you are going to be having a good time, trust me. That's your 16 damage attack before you even get to level 2. Creative Shock, of course, one of the best fire cards, a way to draw some cards and then discard ideally floating memory cards. Now, as we're a full fire package, again, we don't have that many floating memory cards. This is a lot like our triple threat Merlin list, where we only have the Flame Rune Swordsman and the Tempered Steels. So it's a card that does get a little clunky sometimes, especially because we don't get that class bonus like Merlin does. Really a great card to see turn 1, one of the ideal cards to see in your opener. Later in the game, it just starts to get a little bit clunkier, but still can be useful. Cremation Ritual, a way to get rid of some of our allies, and we only run 2 copies of this because, again, it's a card that just gets clunky. We want our allies to be on the board threatening the opponent. We want the opponent to say, okay, I have to deal with that thing or it's going to kill me, and they'll start devoting the resources to killing your allies, and then you're going to start getting sort of that tempo advantage from that. However, sometimes it just lets you get these kind of clean turns where you can get down a hasty messenger or a clumsy, attack with it, then sack it, draw a bunch of cards, and set yourself up to sort of build up to those gigantic swings later on, or those big Rending Flame combos. And I think one of the big differences between the great players and the good players with this deck is going to be knowing sort of when to pull back and build up rather than just all out pushing. And Cremation Ritual is a card that you kind of want to have some copies of to make sure you can do that. Also lets you sack your Floating Memory, so you can get that set up as well. Keep that in mind. Really useful card. It just didn't feel like it felt right at 4 of in this deck. Sparklight is in here. I love the choice of this card because the Sparklight allows you to play around things like Water Barrier and Spell Shield Arcane when you're going for your gigantic Rending combos. And outside of that, it's just some extra damage on the opponent directly to their face that they might not be prepared to deal with. So yeah, this solid card in here. Doesn't need to be 4 of, but it's 3 of as a way. And just to be really clear, the way you want to do this is your opponent plays like the Spell Shield Arcane. You let the Spell Shield resolve, and then you play Sparklight before resolving the damage that they were responding to, because then the Sparklight will pop the Spell Shield, deal 2 unpreventable damage. They'll get no Enlightened counters in the case of Spell Shield Arcane, and then your Rending Flames can go through and deal its full damage. Blazing Throw, 3 of, just again, it's so efficient. It's a way to just throw your sword, deal that like last damage you need to finish the game. That's what it's there for. It's great. And Tempered Steel, it's there for the Floating Memory. Very, very rarely will this durability counter matter. Occasionally it can, but very, very rarely. Really, it's there to pitch to Creative Shock or to Cemetery Sentry or Hasty Messenger to get the Floating Memory in to be more efficient with your cards as you're leveling up. So that is it. That's the list. Play your dudes, attack. Pretty straightforward. We'll go quickly through the sideboard. We'll go quickly through the sideboard, though again, like usual, the sideboard is really going to be dependent on your... We'll go quickly through the sideboard, but again, your sideboard is really going to be dependent on your local metagame, so make sure to keep that in mind. What we are currently running is 3 copies of Scavenging Raccoon as a way to manage our opponent's graveyard, especially in that fire mirror match. You want to be the one who has the Rending Flames and your opponent doesn't. Also can deal with someone who's still running heavily on Floating Memory. And it importantly commits a body to the board while it does that. Even though it's a small body, with things like Arthur, it can still be a lot of damage, which is nice. Viridian Protective Trinket is a way that we play against water. Water is going to be trying to control you, and Viridian Protective Trinket is a very, very strong way of playing against it because, again, this was a misprinted card. It does not have the banish text. It is just a constant effect that taxes your opponent for trying to play water element cards on your turn. Tithe Proclamation is a way to deal with the pesky Rye decks that are starting to get a little more popular again, that are drawing a lot of cards, and also that Crux Lorraine, Crux Merlin build that draws a lot of cards. It can sort of tempo your opponent on the late game, although it is kind of clunky to play in here because, again, you want to be just generally drawing cards and pushing the aggro on, but against those matchups, that can give you potentially that extra turn you need to win the game, and it really doesn't do much to you at all. And then we have 3 copies of Immolation Trap as another way to get through things like the Majestic Spirit, or the gigantic ally Sylvie might play. This lets you just throw one of your other allies into it and then trap the big ally to get rid of it and deal with that problem before it becomes too problematic for you. So that's it. That's the list. Go ahead, play dudes, attack, take your opponent out, put the pressure on, be the problem. That's what you want to do with this list. As a reminder, Dylan B's list that we base some of these changes on is down in the description below. So make sure you check that out and compare notes and see which list you like better. But I think, I'm pretty happy with where we're at with this one. It's been very good, at least in our testing and our local metagame, and is a great deck to test our other decks against to make sure they can stand up to the heat. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of this list and what other decks you're hoping to see as we're getting closer and closer to Ascent. I'm looking forward to seeing so many of you there. But for now, I hope you enjoyed watching this. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you guys in the next one.